This video is an explanation of the reading comp passage about environmental regulations. This could be watched in conjunction with any question about the passage. Of course, each question will be discussed in its own video explanation. And I will say, if you're answering several questions about this passage, I would urge you to answer all the questions first, then watch this video so that you answer all the questions with your own understanding of the passage. Here's the beginning of the passage, the first paragraph. Compared to regulations in other countries, those of the United States tend to be narrower in scope, with an emphasis on manufacturing processes and specific categories of pollution, and little or no attention to many other factors that affect environmental quality. An example is the focus on controlling pollution rather than influencing decisions about process, raw materials, or products that determine environmental impacts. Regulations in the United States tend to isolate specific aspects of production processes and attempts to control them stringently, which means that some aspects of the business are regulated tightly, although sometimes not cost-effectively, while others are ignored. Other countries and several American states have recently made more progress in preventing pollution at its source and considering such issues as product life cycles, packaging waste, and industrial energy efficiency. So very interesting. It sounds as if what the United States, at least the federal government, is doing, it's requiring very specific actions to fight pollution. And it's being very narrow, and because it's narrow in the things that it does regulate, it's leaving very few options for industry, but also because it's narrow, it's missing a lot. And it sounds like other countries and several states have done a better job at looking at the whole picture. Environmental regulation in the United States is also more prescriptive than elsewhere, in the sense of requiring specific actions with little discretion left to the regulating firm. There is also great reliance on action-forcing laws and technology standards. So that's a short second paragraph, and then the third paragraph is long, and it gets split up between this screen and the next. So the third paragraph begins, these contrasts are illustrated nicely in a 1974 book that used a hare and tortoise analogy to compare air quality regulation in the United States and Sweden. So the hare and the tortoise, this is supposed to be a race. Now, of course, you would think that the hare would easily win the race against the tortoise. But of course, what happens in the fable is that the hare winds up either taking a nap or doing something else, and they finish about the same time. So the idea is that the United States is the hare. The United States codified ambitious goals in statutes that drove industry to adopt new technologies under the threat of sanctions. So it sounded like they were doing an awful lot. So they were going to win. They were the hare. Where Sweden, the tortoise, used a more collaborative process that stressed results but worked with industry in deciding how to achieve them. So it sounded like that would be something much slower. In the end, air quality were about the same. So even though they took very, very different approaches, they kind of got to the same place. Similar results have been found in other comparative analyses of environmental regulations. For example, one study of a multinational firm with operations in the United States and Japan found that pollution levels in both countries were similar, despite higher pollution abatement expenditures in the United States. So in other words, the pollution itself is about the same, but the U.S., they're spending far more money to get the same result. The higher costs observed in the United States were thus due in large part not to more stringent standards, but to the higher regulatory transaction costs. So in other words, just the fact that there are all these regulators who have to check specific things, and it costs the government, costs the businesses, all this money just to do all this minute regulation, that's where the money is going. And so that makes it different from these other countries like Japan. Because agencies in different countries share information about technology, best practices, and other issues, the pollution levels found acceptable in different countries tend to be quite similar. So in other words, everyone gets to about the same level with regard to pollution, but the U.S. is paying much, much more to get there. And so the author, this is a very understated analysis, but the author is making this profound point. He's raising this profound implicit question. Why are we spending all this money to get to the same place that everyone else gets to anyway?